you are a professional skeptic.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Yeah. I edited the UK version of Skeptic magazine for a decade. I have been working in the area of anomalistic psychology for, well, decades. So, yeah, I think professional skeptic is fair.
Have you seen a lot of anomalies?
Depends how you define anomaly. I mean, to be honest, it's one of those very, very tricky areas when it comes to defining stuff. So, I mean, people used to ask me, what's your area of research? And I would say it's the psychology of paranormal belief and ostensibly paranormal experiences, which is a bit of a mouthful. And I thought I'd need to come up with something more concise. The term anomalistic psychology was already around, so I thought that's the term I'll use. But now, of course, what happens is people ask me what my area of research is, and I say anomalistic psychology, and they say, what the hell is that? And I say it's the psychology of ostensibly paranormal experiences and paranormal beliefs. So it's not really solved the problem. I mean, the point here is that a lot of these things that we might think of as being kind of anomalous experiences are actually quite common, even though they do freak people out. They kind of feel unusual and anomalous in that sense, but they're not anomalous in the sense of being very, very rare.
And these are anomalous phenomena like seeing things, hearing things, being abducted by aliens. What are these things?
Yes, well, it's pretty much everything. I mean, when I'm amongst friends, I sometimes just use the shorthand when people say, "What's anomalistic psychology?" I say it's the science of weird shit. So it's everything from alien abductions to zombies, okay, and anything weird in between. So that would cover, well, like I say, alien type experiences, ghosts, people who claim to have psychic powers, the whole range. It doesn't necessarily even have to be paranormal. If it's a bit weird and wacky, then I'm interested in what's the psychology behind it.
Should we be worried about any of these? Like, are there aliens coming to abduct us anytime soon?
I don't think you guys need to worry too much. I think you'll be okay. I just have a feeling about that.
And so what is the psychology behind belief in these sorts of phenomena? Is there something universal that has come out of your study?
Well, I mean, again, I retired last October, but up until then I was teaching kind of 20-hour course on this stuff. So as you might imagine, there is no one single answer. It does depend on the particular phenomenon that we're looking at. There are certain themes that run through anomalistic psychology. And I think one of the kind of main themes would be the relevance of cognitive biases. You know, we all have biases in the way that we think, in the way that we perceive the world, just, you know, generally just how we process information. And some of those biases may be relevant to explaining certain types of ostensibly paranormal experience. And so that's one of the, you know, what we will try and do is to look for non-paranormal explanations and then see if we can put those explanations to the test by designing an experiment where we can actually demonstrate that the particular bias that we're interested in does seem to be responsible for people misperceiving or misinterpreting or misremembering in such a way that they would conclude that something paranormal is happening when, in fact, there are alternative explanations.
And so this is all about perception, right? So someone sees a ghost, or they see, I don't know, what other, they see an alien, they see something that can't be explained. And you as the scientist are attempting to figure out what it is that they saw. How do you test for something like that in the laboratory? It seems so subjective, so personal, so interior.
Well, again, it's not necessarily all about perception, is one thing. I mean, it's a lot of it is about perception, but it's also about memory, because typically what we're dealing with when we're dealing with reports of the paranormal is that we are dealing with the report.
The aftermath.
We are not dealing with the event itself. And so the very first question that arises is, well, can we actually trust the report? So, one of the big areas of research for me and colleagues in this area is looking at memory for anomalous experiences. And to be honest, it can get quite difficult to know whether you're really talking about perception or memory. Let me give you a kind of specific example. One of our studies was based on an experiment that was originally reported by my friend Richard Wiseman. He was interested in the power of suggestion. So you may be familiar with a self-proclaimed psychic called Uri Geller. Mr. Geller became very famous.
He was very popular in Alpha Flux.
Because there you go. I'm not sure. I think he may be from your neck of the woods originally. I'm not sure. But he, one of the many things that he claimed he could do was that he could kind of bend metal just by gently stroking it.
Spoon bender.
So he became very well known as a spoon bender. Now, I was originally, as a teenager, I was kind of convinced that this guy was the real thing. Now I know, I've got lots of friends who are conjurers, and they can do this trick, which is what it is effectively. And it looks just the same when they do it as when he does it. Now, a lot of people objected to the idea that it was all being done by sleight of hand, because they would say, well, I've seen him do it. And after he had bent the spoon or the fork or the key, whatever it was, he put it down and it carried on bending and he wasn't even touching it. Now, that would take some explaining. But Richard Wiseman is a conjurer as well as being a psychologist. He knows all about the power of suggestion, and he was pretty convinced that this was what was going on in that situation. So he did a neat little experiment where he showed people a video of an alleged psychic who was in fact a conjurer using sleight of hand. After he'd bent the key using sleight of hand, he puts it down on the table. There's a nice close-up shot, and in one condition, the participants hear him say, if you look closely, you'll see it's still bending. And the other condition is identical, except you don't get that suggestion. 40% of the people who get the suggestion report that they think the key carries on bending. It doesn't, by the way. But, it's a very simple manipulation and a very strong effect. We replicated the experiment. We got the same results, but we also threw in a new element. We had people watch the video in pairs, and when they'd seen the video, they then discussed it with each other, and then they independently reported back. Now, what the genuine participants didn't know was that the other person in the pair was a confederate, a stooge working with us, who had been instructed to either say during the discussion it did carry on bending or it didn't. And that had a further additive effect. So if you're in the condition where you got the suggestion from the psychic and you got the reinforcement from the confederate, we got to levels of 60% of people reporting they thought the key carried on bending. Now, the reason I'm talking about this particular experiment is it kind of highlights the difficulty of knowing whether we're talking about perception, memory, or both, because it is probably the case that the suggestion actually has an influence on perception at the time when they are witnessing the event. But obviously, you can also influence memory after the event has taken place. So we certainly know in our study that memory was involved, a distortion of memory. In Richard's, it could have been an effect on perception or memory or both. So, but I mean, again, the point is that at the end of the day, someone thinks they've seen something that didn't actually happen.
And the implication is that this plays out in people's everyday lives all the time, right? It's like their pre-existing beliefs can influence their perception and their memories. My question...
Absolutely. And I mean,
Go ahead.
Sorry, go on. I was going to say, you can think of lots of examples from everyday life. I mean, I think one that kind of would spring to mind quite readily would be different sports fans supporting different teams, watching the same game, but each deciding that the other team has committed more fouls, has kind of played more, their goals were offside, etc., etc. They're watching the same game, but they genuinely and sincerely have a different interpretation, different perception, different memory of it.
That's a really good example. My question is how this, in your experience, influences the way that folks, particularly scientists, design their investigations in the first place. Is there an aspect of motivated reasoning that plays into the outcome of experiments themselves on Earth?
I think that there almost certainly is. Psychology in particular is going through what some people are describing as a crisis. I would actually see it as being a kind of healthy period of self-reflection and criticism and trying to improve matters. This is a topic I could talk about for hours on its own, but you might want to cover other things as well, so I'll keep it concise. Up until quite recently, psychology has been very dependent upon a particular approach that's very dependent upon having a kind of significant result, which means a kind of p-value of less than 0.05. It's become apparent recently that a lot of the effects, which were even in the textbooks and taken as being kind of, well-established, robust effects, probably aren't.
Oh, no.
Now, that's not to say that psychology has no robust replicable effects. It does. It has hundreds. But it also has a lot of effects being reported that are spuriously significant.
And this is because scientists are finding ways to hack those statistics. They're sort of like setting the bar and being like, well, if the bar is here, we can figure out a way to get to this bar statistically one way or the other.
I think, in a sense, but I don't think they're doing it quite as deliberately as that.
Right.
Fraud in science, actually kind of just making your data up, is like the biggest crime. And if you are caught in the act of doing that, well, that's it. Your career's over. Your reputation's gone.
Right.
A much more insidious problem and a much more widespread problem is what are referred to as questionable research practices. And this is kind of just minor deviations from best practice. And I can look back now on my career and realize I have done these things. I will put my hand up to it. Didn't think I was doing anything wrong.
Burn him!
Well, exactly. I kind of explain this to my students and I say, imagine you've put all this effort into your final year projects and you've got a particular hypothesis that you're testing, you analyze your results, and they don't come out in line with your hypothesis using that statistical test. There's quite a temptation to see if you can analyze your results a different way and produce the effect that must be there. Or maybe you will have a close look at your raw data and realize that there are a couple of outliers there. That's the guy who came in last Tuesday to take part in my experiment. I think he was drunk.
Throw him out.
I'm gonna get rid of him, Now, none of these things in and of themselves seem like major crimes, but cumulatively, all the little decision points in designing an experiment, running your experiment, deciding which data to do, whether you transform your data or not, all of these things mean that you end up having kind of several bites at the cherry.
And the stakes are so high, it seems like. If you're trying to literally graduate with your PhD or secure funding for the next year so your lab doesn't close.
All the pressure is on to get interesting results that tell a nice, clean story.
And these are like survival pressures, it sounds like. This is literally whether your lab, metaphorically eats or starves.
Yeah. And so, as I say, it is not unheard of for people to actually kind of resort to just outright fraud. But that's much, much rarer than these other practices that, survey results show that a high percentage of psychologists say, I have done that. Yes, I know I've done that a couple of times. Yeah. And it's only now that people are fully realizing what's wrong with it, with doing that, how it really, really totally inflates the chance that you're going to get a spuriously significant result that isn't a real effect at all. And I think that's very, very healthy. I do feel slightly guilty because obviously I'm kind of retired now, and I'm still keeping a bit of research going, but I'm kind of looking back at my own research career, the papers I got published, and saying to the younger generation, do as I say, don't do as I did, which feels, because to do it properly is a lot more effort. It's a lot more work. It's all about things. You can get around a lot of these problems by pre-registration. You decide in advance exactly how you're going to run your study, which analyses you're going to do, and you register it before you even start. Now, there's nothing wrong with post hoc analysis as long as it's clear that it is post hoc analysis. There might be some really interesting effect there that you would have totally missed, but it has to be clear to the reader, this is not something we set out for, because it's all too easy to analyze your data, torture it until it confesses, and then make up a just so story that says why you had this particular hypothesis. That is.
And the logging of that data, the registry allows you to sort of accumulate the negative information as well, so you find out what doesn't work as well.
Yeah, and what really focused my mind on all of this stuff was a particular episode. I'm supposed to get up 10 years ago now. There was a paper published in a mainstream psychology journal, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, a very high impact journal, very well respected journal, by Professor Darrell Bem at Cornell University. Now, Bem has been around for many, many, many decades, very, very well respected within the field, but known, unusually, to be very, very sympathetic towards parapsychology and paranormal claims. He published a series of 9 experiments, over 1,000 participants in total, and in 8 of those experiments claimed to have positive significant effects, suggesting that people could sense events before they had taken place.
Wow.
Now, I'm not a physicist, but my limited understanding would suggest that doesn't really fit with current conventional understandings. Certainly doesn't make much sense in psychological terms. And obviously, as you might imagine, this caused a huge controversy. It was widely reported by the science media around the world. And to Bem's credit, he said, I want other people to replicate these effects, and I'm happy to share my software to make that easier for people. We decided we'd give it a go. Now, I must admit, we had an ulterior motive. We being myself, Richard Wiseman, and Stuart Ritchie. We thought this would be an easy way to get a paper into a very good journal. We didn't expect to replicate the effects, but let's go for it. So we each did an independent replication of Bem's experiment 9. That was on something called the retroactive facilitation of recall. I'll explain what that is. What Bem was generally doing across his series of studies was to use his phrase, to time reverse classic psychological effects. Let me explain in this particular case what I mean. If I were to give you, I don't know how it works for aliens, but if I were to give humans a list of words to read, let them read the words once, and then test their memory, then you wouldn't expect them to report as many words as if they could rehearse the words, i.e. read them several times. That's just kind of common sense. According to Bem, even if you don't do the rehearsal until after you have been tested, you will still perform better on the words that you rehearse.
If there's a rehearsal at all.
Wonderland stuff. If that were the case, it'd be great news for students because they could sit the exam and revise for it afterwards when they knew what the questions were. It would be fantastic. So anyway, long story short, we each did an independent replication at each of our different universities. None of us got the results that Ben got. We wrote up our paper. We sent it into the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology because, as we all know, replication is the cornerstone of science. But the editor rejected it without even sending it out for peer review on the grounds that we don't publish replications.
Wow.
Whoa.
Well, we kind of, yeah. Well, we thought this is wrong. You know, this was an effect that was talked about all around the world. If it's not real, then that's important. But we could not sway him. We tried 2 other high impact journals, got the same treatment. We sent it to the British Journal of Psychology, who did send it out for review. One referee loved it. The other referee raised various concerns. Was not, we thought we could tell from what this referee had said that we thought we knew who it was. We thought it was a certain Professor Darrell Bem of Cornell University.
Oh, no.
And it turned out it was. He quite happily said, yes, it was. We said, look, there's a clear conflict of interest. Send it to a third referee, but no, they would not be moved. Eventually, we published it in PLOS One, which is a public access journal, open access journal, which turned out to be a good move because at one point, because this had been such, covered by the media so much, there was a lot of interest. We were getting 1,000 views a day at one point, which is certainly the most interest I've ever had.
Wow, yeah.
And then this fed into the wider discussion that was already going on within psychology about replication issues. And I mean, say that is still going on, that debate. But we now know that a lot of the effects that were taken as real effects for decades, as I say, in the textbooks that we were given to our first year students, were not real effects at all. And that's got implications for one of my other areas of interest, which is parapsychology. Because obviously, if it is the case, as now no one would dispute, that many of the effects that have been reported over the years in psychology were not real effects at all, that's also going to be happening in the world of parapsychology.
Sure.
And therefore, the effects that are published in the parapsychology journals, some of them at least, are certainly not going to be genuine effects. And it raises the question, given that all science is about trying to separate the signal from the noise, what would a science look like if all you had was noise? Would it look like parapsychology? I suspect it might.
Well, this also opens another can of worms because it really affects the trust that other humans have in the institution of science, right?
Like, I don't think
Absolutely,
these
yeah.
political maneuverings are unique to psychology.
That's
No,
true.
I think you're absolutely right. And I also think that it also kind of highlights the kind of public understanding of science, which I think is often way off the mark. And that can be a problem, particularly when we're going through various kind of health scares. I mean, certainly people often think of science, the general public, I mean, as being about facts. It's about things that are either true
Certainty.
or not true. And exactly.
Well, it's presented in this way. It's presented very much as the anchor for everything. This is how you know what the world is like.
Yeah. And I think that's that is just the problem is, of course, that most people do prefer that kind of certainty, that kind of, they want to know, well, what should I do? What's the right thing to do? I mean, we're seeing at the moment with the COVID pandemic, even today, there are a number of countries across Europe that have decided that they're going to put a pause on using the AstraZeneca vaccine because there have been reports of very, very limited number of reports of people getting blood clots afterwards. And in actual fact, if you look at the figures are way below what you would expect, regardless of any kind of vaccination. But the precautionary principle, is the way they see it. And
well, vaccines
again,
especially have such a high level of, I don't want to say controversy, but there is definitely a group of people that are very suspicious. And so you have to be maybe more careful with that because there's this there's a whole group that's ready to question.
Oh, yeah. And there's groups that are interested in profiting off of that skepticism too. I heard an interesting theory the other day that there's a Russian vaccine that's trying to outcompete these other vaccines that are being marketed, and there's a lot of disinformation being at least pushed, if not created, to discredit the brands, the name brands, in order to secure markets in countries that are still open to the option.
But I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I also think there's an element of kind of motivated reasoning here. I mean, we in the United Kingdom are aware that the UK is not very popular with Europe at the moment, not surprisingly, because of Brexit and the things that were being said by our stupid politicians. So there's quite an anti-British feeling out there.
It's weird. I hate to interrupt you for a moment, but has science looked into why everyone seems to think that politicians are stupid?
I think it's not my particular area, but I mean I said stupid, and that's probably just me being venting a little bit there, but manipulative certainly, and playing to the crowd, and I think this is kind of an interesting point for me, at least, that skepticism, if you people talk about the skeptical movement, and I don't really like that phrase because it sounds like we're trying to tell people what to think, and it's more about how to think and about critical thinking and knowing how to evaluate evidence. But the situation we're in now, I mean, the kind of people talk about fake news and so on as if this is a recent phenomenon. Of course, it's not. It was forever like that. The skeptical movement as such, if you want to use that label, really got going back in the 1970s in an organized way. It was certainly around then. It predates that. I mean, you look back in history, there have always been unfounded conspiracy theories and so on. It's always been there. It's always been used by people who want to influence and manipulate other people. And a lot of the lessons from anomalistic psychology about which forms of evidence you maybe should trust more than others is very, very relevant to this whole issue. So again, one of my other areas of interest is the psychology of belief in conspiracy theories.
Do you know Kasim Kassam?
I don't think I do.
We spoke to him last year about conspiracy theories and why people...
Sorry, what was the name again? Maybe I think
he's at work. He's in your country also. His name is Kasim Kassam.
I think I know the name. I don't think I know him personally.
Cool guy.
I mean, it's quite interesting that there's... up until maybe even 10 years ago, there's very little psychological research on belief in conspiracies, whereas now, understandably maybe, it's a really hot topic. And there are there's a lot of researchers within the UK and in America and elsewhere in the world who are really doing some very, very interesting and good research in the area.
Well, when it comes to belief in conspiracies, something that we really have had a hard time wrapping our heads around is the confounding variable that some of the conspiracies turn out to be based in at least partial reality. Where, you look at something like vaccines and the fear that surrounds them is partially based in the fact that there have been vaccines that have caused problems based off of how they were manufactured.
Yeah.
And this illusion of safety.
And there's also the fact that, like we were talking about earlier, scientists have a tendency of motivated reasoning. There are interests at play.
Yeah. I mean, not just scientists. I mean,
of course.
All humans.
Of course.
I can't speak for you guys, but I can speak for humans on this one.
We're guilty too.
You're quite right that one thing that everybody who's working in the area of the psychology of belief in conspiracies would acknowledge is that, yes, conspiracies do sometimes happen. Because clearly they do, and you could even say, well, and the ones that we know about, maybe there are others that we don't know about that haven't been exposed yet, But what's interesting is the fact that we're interested in why is it that some people find conspiracies much more attractive than others? We know, for example, that we could just make up a conspiracy now on the basis of no evidence whatsoever. And if we were to put that in a survey along with other more famous conspiracies like faked moon landings and the JFK assassination, a percentage of people would say, yep, I believe that. We also know that, the conspiracies start within minutes of any major international event. It's far too early for anybody to have actually had access to good quality evidence of what actually has happened. But immediately it's a false flag operation. It's this, it's that group. It's, so it's a mindset basically for some people.
Do you think that mindset is related to the 40% that you identified who would see the spoon as continuing to bend in the videos?
There's definitely a degree of overlap there between many of the personality type variables that correlate with paranormal belief and the tendency to report paranormal experiences also correlate with belief in conspiracies. Now, again, it's like any of these things we're talking about, it's multifactorial. There's always lots of other factors that play in. But certainly people who score high, this is kind of, I suppose, fairly obvious, but people who score high on measures of paranoid tendencies would score higher on various measures of belief in conspiracies. People who score highly on something called schizotypy, which is a kind of tendency to have unusual experiences, not necessarily at the level of a kind of schizophrenic breakdown, but I think this is another kind of aspect of anomalistic psychology, that those kind of weird experiences are much more common than is generally realized, and are not necessarily an indication of a serious psychopathology. But it's a continuum. Some people never have a weird experience in their lives. Others at the other extreme, going through a psychotic breakdown, have completely lost touch with reality. But there's a whole continuum in between that. And some people who have quite high levels of these unusual experiences, but still lead kind of quite happy and productive lives. Indeed, there's this notion of what's called the happy schizotype, which is someone who maybe experiences quite a lot of these unusual experiences, hears voices, sees things that other people don't see, etc., but rather than being distressed by it, has decided that it's a gift. And I think many of those end up becoming mediums. It fits. And we know they do score higher on those kind of measures.
And there may have been an evolutionary role for individuals like that in the past. Would you agree? It seems
it's possible,
like if there's belief at the core of all of this, and humans have this real ability to believe in things that frankly contradict all logic and reasoning, but there must be a reason that your brains evolved to make these snap beliefs in order to survive.
Yeah, I think that's it. I very much tend to think of. That was one of the things that I used to kind of wonder about. Why is it that we have these cognitive biases in the first place? Wouldn't evolution have operated so that they kind of died out? They went away. Surely it's better to have an accurate perception of what's going on in the world around us. And then, on kind of further reading and reflecting on the issue, the idea that's, Daniel Kahneman in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, amongst other people, but he's probably one of the main names associated with the idea that we all have two different modes of thought, sometimes labeled as System 1 and System 2. And System 1 is very quick, it's non-conscious, it doesn't demand any attention or effort. And again, at the risk of oversimplifying, we can think of it as kind of intuition. And a kind of prime example that would often be given would be you meet someone for the first time and very quickly decide whether you like them, they're your kind of person or not. before you've really had much chance to interact, you kind of come to that decision. System 2, System 1 is very much emotion driven as well. System 2 is much slower. It's effortful. It's kind of sequential. It's step by step. You're consciously aware that you're using System 2. So if I were to give you a mental puzzle to solve, you would have to use System 2 for that. Now, there's a lot of evidence to show that we're all much more influenced by System 1 than we realize. A System 2 we could label rationality. Yeah. And we're much more influenced, no matter how rational we like to think of ourselves, by System 1. And there's just mountains of evidence to support that assertion. Now, if you think of it from an evolutionary perspective, the argument is that it is very often much better in evolutionary terms when, survival was not guaranteed and there were dangers around every corner, to make a quick decision that is usually right, rather than take longer time to make a slower decision that might be right a little bit more often, but that delay is going to cost you, And the idea is that if you're going to pass on your genes to the next generation, you want to be one of the people who's making a quick decision. And even if sometimes it's wrong, even if that rustling in the bushes is not a danger, just err on the side of assuming it is. And that explains a lot. It explains why we tend to we're very good at picking up on potential threats. We're very good at finding meaning and significance in what's going on around us. We're great at pattern detection and all these things. And sometimes we overplay it. And the idea that, we seem to also have an inbuilt default that when something happens in the world around us, someone or something made it happen for a particular reason. And again, that obviously feeds into conspiracy thinking big time.
One thing that's
some of our own work.
One thing that's really interesting to me before we move on from that is that, yes, it seems like humans have developed this very snap judgment system, like, is that sound that's in the bushes dangerous or not? But there's this other level that's really interesting where if they're wrong, or if they're mistaken, and they're mistaken too often, then the rest of the tribe starts to really treat that person in a pathological sense, and perhaps rightfully so, because they don't want to have to be waking up from their slumber every time this person is sounding a false alarm. And it seems really interesting how these people have been sort of pushed to the edge of your human society, and they're given this brandings like pseudoscientist or crank or... Got some more, Quinn?
Crazy person?
Crazy person. I don't know. But...
charlatan?
Yeah, what do you make of that? What do you make of those terms? Do you come across them often?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, one of my heroes was the late great Carl Sagan. And I mean that argument is often used that they laughed at Galileo, and so on and so forth. There's quite a lot wrong with that comment insofar as it was the religious leadership that persecuted Galileo, not scientists. But the idea that some of these people may actually be onto something. And occasionally, of course, it does turn out to be true. Alfred Wegener and continental drift. I think it was Lavoisier that said, meteorites can't be rocks falling from the sky because there are no rocks in the sky. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, mate, you're wrong. There are.
Well, the nature editors are kind of all that's left. I mean, they're the only authority at this point. It's not like there's a church that really gets the final say. So it...
Well, Sagan's kind of reply to that is, they laughed at Galileo, but they also laughed at Bobo the clown. It's for every 1,000 kind of ideas that are initially taken as being crank ideas, probably 999 of them will turn out to be crank ideas, but one of them won't. Now, none of us have got a kind of, perfect judgment on what's true and what's not. And there's a, I mean, there's a theory in kind of in psychology, and I think used beyond psychology, signal detection theory. You may be familiar with it. It's basically the idea that, again, it's about kind of separating the signal from the noise, or if you like, the true from the false, in this context. And you've got a situation where you're trying to make it. I mean, let's take an analogy of somebody watching a kind of radar display. And sometimes you're going to think you've seen something and actually there wasn't anything there. That's one kind of error you can make. It's a kind of false alarm. Sometimes you're going to make an error where you miss something that really is there. And again, these kind of correspond to kind of type 1 and type 2 errors in science. And of course, you can kind of set people to either, if you're aware that there's a possibility of an incoming attack, then the thing to do is whenever you think you see something, you raise the alarm. If actually that's not the case, then you'll be much more relaxed criteria. The point is you've got kind of two overlapping distributions. You've got the noise and you've got the signal plus the noise, and two normal distributions that overlap. And it's where you place your criterion that determines. Sometimes, for someone like me, who is kind of, a professional skeptic, as you said at the beginning, I will want very, very, very good evidence to convince me of some claim that is currently not accepted by conventional science, which may mean that I actually will reject stuff that is true. That's the cost. That's the price I will pay for that. Other people, will have a much more lax criterion. They will get all the stuff that I would reject, but they'll also accept stuff that is false. And none of us, I personally don't believe in God, but only God could actually have perfect judgment on this. And so it really is a matter of, the kind of evidence that would never convince me on some kind of paranormal claim would be anecdotal evidence. I'm aware as a psychologist of all the problems with unreliability of memory, the way that our beliefs bias us, blah, 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 blah. But it might actually be the case that people in real life outside the laboratory really do have paranormal experiences. And I'll never accept that because the evidence won't be good enough for me. What would convince me is a robust, replicable phenomenon that could be produced under controlled conditions by most people who try and do that experiment.
Do you think you'd be convinced if it happened to you?
No, well, I shouldn't be, because I'm not going to, it'd be hypocritical of me to say, and again, I used to use this as an example when I was lecturing the students. I talk about near-death experiences that are amongst the most profound experiences that anyone could ever have, and convinces very, very many people of certainly that the mind can leave the body, but also, maybe they had a glimpse of the afterlife. And I used to say to my students, because obviously I don't buy that. I think it's a hallucinatory experience, albeit a very rich and profound one. But I used to say to the students, if I come in next week and say, I've had a near-death experience, and all that other stuff I was saying is all wrong, you've got to believe now. They shouldn't, because I'm not saying I'm immune from having those kind of experiences. It's only those other people, those believers, that have them. No, it can happen to anyone.
Belief is such an important aspect of human existence, though. It seems like science is supposed to be about something that is beyond belief. It's about possibility, and yet this idea of religious belief kind of drifts into it, no?
Like there's two sides of science. The first one is sort of outlining the phenomena, where you do all these observations and measurements and tests and all this stuff. And then there's this other side where you got to explain what happened. But your explanation really can only say what's a possible cause. You can never really be certain about your theory. The theories are constantly being refined on and on and on. But yet people want to believe. They want to know the theory is correct and final and certain.
Well, again, I don't think, like I said before, I don't think that really corresponds to certainly my take on what science is. I'm kind of very influenced by Popper. Popper's views on science and falsifiability and all that. And although I now think that what Popper was describing was really a kind of idealized view of science and not the way science actually operates in the real world, because scientists are people, and they have all the biases and all the kind of motivations, good and bad, that other human beings have. But this, so science for me has never been about certainty. It's not about certainty. Whereas, I mean, and so I'm very, very, I tend to be very, very averse to kind of any belief system which claims certainty. And it tends to be religions that do that. It tends to be religions that say to doubt is a sin. You must not doubt. And that faith, unquestioning faith, is a good thing. Well, I don't think it is. I've never thought it was. I think you should question. You should question scientists. You should question political leaders. You should question religious leaders. That's, for me, fundamental. I mean, the conspiracy theorists, they're questioning the official story. I would say that they've maybe not got the right critical thinking of things to evaluate the evidence, but in that sense, they're questioning stuff. And so,
but there is a sense of questioning consensus science being not the right thing to do. Is that the case in your country, or is there an interest in the scientific community of being doubted by the public?
It's a difficult one because of the effects that it might. We've got a perfect example at the moment, as we were talking about earlier. The doubts that have been raised about the AstraZeneca vaccine will almost certainly lead to those who are already vaccine hesitant becoming even more vaccine hesitant. They were right to not take the vaccine because, look, you get blood clots. Yeah. Now, anybody who really understands what's going on, and I'm not claiming to be an expert, but people that I do believe know what they're talking about, would point out that the risks of not taking the vaccine far outweigh the very, very minute risks of a blood clot if you do have the vaccine, even if there was a link there, which there almost certainly isn't. So there's that whole thing. It gets back to, should we sell science to the public in a way that we know isn't actually really true, but will get a better effect in terms of keeping more people alive? Again, I don't know what the answer is to that, but that's, it's a really nice example of the situation we're in now, where we're having to make, decisions about that.
That seems like a value question. Like, do you value life and death more than you value truth?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, for me, science is all about truth, and I actually, again, I'm an atheist. I am, pretty much a kind of, I suppose, my view. I don't think we've solved. I don't think we've solved the problem, the mind-body problem. I don't think we understand consciousness. I'm fascinated by that question. But I don't think anybody has come up with a remotely convincing solution. I think there's lots of things that we don't know, we can't answer with science. On the other hand, I think that science has provided the best answer. I think that science is a method. It's a method of approaching the truth. And for me personally, I think it's the best method we have, albeit that it is not perfect.
You said something very interesting, which is that there are things that can't be known with science.
Well, yeah, or at least potentially that is the case. I mean, we'll only really know whether it really is the case if we manage to survive long enough to keep the scientific enterprise going. Many questions now that 100 or 200 years ago would have seemed like totally unknowable. The composition of stars. How could we possibly ever know that? And yet now we're pretty confident we do, and I'm happy to accept that, yes, we probably do. But all kinds of other issues as well. Now, it may turn out, again, from my limited understanding of Gödel's theorem, I mean, I don't know if you've read the book Gödel-Escher-Bar.
Yeah, I love that one.
I love that book as well, but that kind of pretty much says that if you have this is going from memory now, from reading it about kind of 30 years ago, but that if you have a formal system that basically you can have a situation where you can have truths that could not be explained by the kind of formal system that you have, but could still be true.
Blind spots. You don't know what you don't know, kind of thing.
Well, there's that, yeah. And there may be some things that are unknowable through the scientific method. I don't know. But like I said before, it's about where you set your criterion. If you say, well, I'm prepared to accept some things on faith, either because they just make me feel good, or I feel I've had some mystical insight that means I know they are true, well, that's your personal decision, And again, I mean, one of the things that, in terms of my own thinking about these issues, I went from being a believer in a lot of this stuff to being a kind of, what I would now say has been a kind of more extreme end skeptic. And I'm quite happy to accept that we're all irrational, all of us. We can try to our best, and I think that science is the best way to do this, to take account of our own biases and irrationalities and so on. But we're all irrational. And actually, it looks like it's probably, from a psychological health point of view, not the best thing in the world to have an accurate perception of the way the world is. It actually seems that people who are psychologically healthy are deluded. They are
healthily deluded.
Unrealistically optimistic. And again, there's a lot of evidence that if you give psychologically healthy people questionnaires that say, what are the chances of all these really good things happening to you? And what are the chances of all these really bad things happening to you? We overestimate the good stuff. We underestimate the bad stuff.
Well, this ties back to what you were saying about the two systems of thinking, intuition versus rationality. If humans had children based off of rationality, they probably would never have children, right?
You may well be right, yeah. I mean, but at the end of the day, my feeling is, if you give the same questionnaires to the depressives, they're pretty good. Life really is shit, But would you want to swap places with them? Do you want to have a view of life as being really, really shit, or do you want to fool yourself? Actually, life's pretty good, Yeah, I want to go for the latter. I'll go for the delusion any day of the week. But I mean, it's a kind of an ironic kind of take on things, obviously, to kind of say, well, I know that I'm fooling myself, but hey, it's a lot better than being in touch with reality. But that's kind of just one example of where irrational beliefs might actually lead to you being happier. And I think a lot of paranormal beliefs also have that same basis. I mean, as I say, I'm an atheist, so I think a lot of religious beliefs also serve that same purpose of giving people kind of meaning and happiness and all those other good things, even if it's not based on truth.
Well, there doesn't seem to be a society in the history of Earth that didn't believe in something larger than themselves. This current generation, the idea of atheism is sort of the idea that there isn't anything that is larger than the humans. There's nothing that supervenes on reality.
It's kind of a new idea, really.
Yeah, that has to be psychologically destabilizing.
I'm not sure how new it is. And again, I'm not a historian, so I can't really comment. But I think, certainly humanist ideas have been around for centuries. And, part of humanism is a rejection of a kind of supernatural view of the universe. So those ideas have always been around. I mean, I'd happily accept that, the religious supernatural worldview has dominated certainly. But those views have always been around. And again, it just, and I think it is, I would agree with you guys. It's fascinating that anything that's kind of so prevalent across societies, geographically and historically, well, one assumes it must be serving some kind of purpose, some kind of function.
And that's what's really interesting at this moment in time for your species, is it doesn't seem like you've gotten by without that kind of tool. Let's call religion a tool. You haven't really gotten by without it until now. And it seems like religion is less and less popular every year on Earth. So what comes next to fill the hole?
Well, sure. I mean, again, that raises that whole issue of, there's, with respect to paranormal beliefs, different kind of arguments have been put forward in terms of, sometimes people think, paranormal beliefs are on the rise. And now I think they fluctuate, basically. I think they go up and they go down again. And, and it depends on the particular belief you're talking about. But one idea would be that paranormal beliefs are generally about filling some kind of spiritual need that maybe isn't being met by conventional religions. This is sometimes referred to as the spiritual void hypothesis. So in which case you would expect a kind of negative relationship between religiosity and paranormal beliefs. But you could also argue that actually you might expect a positive correlation, because if you already from your religious upbringing accept the idea of life after death, then it's much easier to believe in ghosts and mediums and reincarnation and so on and so forth.
And the stronger your religious belief is, the stronger the void would be that needs filled, right?
Well, yeah. So, but in actual fact, you find out, that it's when you look at the actual data, it's just very, very complicated. It depends on the specific context, the particular religious belief you're talking about. Some religions, explicitly condemn views about certain paranormal beliefs, and some don't, and so on and so forth. So, there's no clear answer on that one. There is a general kind of correlation between religiosity as opposed to belief in a particular religion, which is the general need for religious beliefs, and paranormal beliefs, even beliefs in conspiracies. Those two correlate. Again, from my point of view, you know by now you're talking to a professional skeptic, atheist, total materialist, no spirituality whatsoever. You kind of, I
don't believe
there
you.
is a correlation between all these different types of magical thinking, whether we're talking about belief in unfounded conspiracies, religious beliefs, paranormal beliefs, superstitions, belief in complementary and alternative medicines, the whole kind of range. They do all tend to intercorrelate.
But you believe in like friendship and love and hate. And...
Oh God, no! I've got no time.
That explains that.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, no, but this is it. This is it. I think these are the kind of you're now getting onto the kind of these things that are clearly hugely important to every human being on the planet at an individual level. We can say some stuff about it, but does it get down to that kind of reductionistic? It's all molecules and atoms and neurons firing in your brain. I don't know. It's an issue. The whole issue. Basically, what we're talking about here is everything predetermined, or do we have free will? It does really get down to that kind of level. And
we've been arguing about that for days now.
Yeah, I'm sure. Obviously, you had no choice.
We just wake up, and every day it's the same cycle.
But again, I've not got my head around it at all. I do find the arguments on the kind of lack of free will side more compelling, but I still have the illusion of free will. I still feel that I am a free agent. I still believe in kind of, I've got notions about moral responsibility. You can't have that in a predetermined universe.
Sure you can. You're predetermined to have moral responsibility.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way it works.
Yeah, I knew she'd say that.
Exactly. I have no choice. All of this unfolds.
Yeah, no, but I mean, again, I don't know what the what the answers are at that kind of level. So far I've not seen any kind of, because we're talking about the mind-body problem now, obviously, and I've not seen any kind of solution put forward that's really, I thought, oh wow, yeah, that's it, that makes sense. There's some that I think are more convincing than others. I mean, I didn't find Descartes' kind of pineal gland stuff that convincing, I have to say, but hey, I might be wrong.
Well, he needed a mechanism, right? So the mind-body problem is the idea that there's matter and there's consciousness, and there has to be some kind of connection between the two. And Descartes proposed the pineal gland because it was the only structure in the brain, according to him, that wasn't mirrored. And I don't know enough about the human brain to know if that's the case or not. So he just needed a mechanism. And so he offered
Yeah. But I mean, and it was his best guess at the time. And yeah, okay, let's go for it. But I mean, you've still got this whole thing of how does an immaterial substance interact with a material substance, and basically, you just have to kind of throw up your hands and say, well, I don't know. I mean,
on our planet, at least, we've had a lot of success by just drawing a line between physics and everything else. And you can call everything else matters of motivation, spirit, whatever words you want. But it's really easy to draw a line in the sand between objects that have shape and everything else. And at that point, you can start thinking about these motivational, psychological things as abstractions that can be treated as such without really running into the wall that, oh, there's a machine that's operating all this software too.
Well, yeah, I think so. But yeah, also there are those big issues that kind of crop up that do very much depend on, I think we're all intuitive dualists. I know that I am.
You're a skeptic, but you're a dualist?
Well, in the sense that it feels like the mental stuff is different from the physical stuff. It feels like that. Now, that might well be, and I think it probably is, an illusion. A very useful illusion, but it's an illusion. But
are computers dualists because they have software and hardware?
Whoa.
Well, that's the kind of that's the kind of parallel. That's the kind of analogy that's been made. But I don't know. Like I say, I don't think anybody's solved the mind-body problem, and I don't think
we'll get to work on it.
And it's on the horizon either. I don't think we even know what the shape of an answer would look like, let alone what the answer would be. But I suppose kind of, bringing it back to kind of the stuff that I do, which is obviously the most important stuff.
Yes, of course.
Another feeling.
Back to, but my approach, my kind of, one of the ideas behind anomalistic psychology is to say, well, as a working hypothesis, let's just assume that paranormal phenomena and supernatural phenomena, that doesn't happen. Can we explain what we're talking about now, whatever particular example it might be, in terms of human psychology? And if we don't actually try to do that, then we can, we can never come up with any kind of non-paranormal or non-supernatural accounts. So can we come up with them? Can we put them to the test? Do they seem to provide kind of plausible explanations? Somebody's got to ask the question. Now, we can never, as on the skeptical side of the argument, we can never disprove the notion that mind can be separated from the physical brain, that telepathy, we can never disprove that telepathy exists. We can never disprove a lot of supernatural paranormal type claims. On the other side of the argument, potentially those people who are pushing those ideas could prove the skeptics wrong. But it may well be that with respect to the skeptical approach, you've just not done it right yet. You've not looked in the right place. You've not done it in the right way. And that may be the case. But if we don't ever even try, I think if we can kind of come up with alternative, plausible explanations, put them to the test, and show actually this does seem quite a plausible explanation for a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience, or the illusion that you had a precognitive dream or whatever, then I think it's dirty work, but somebody's got to do it.
Well, it seems like the only way to really test the near-death experience is to start carefully in laboratory-controlled settings killing people.
Well, we've not quite gone that far yet, but there's been an ongoing series of studies. I don't know whether it's still going, where they have set up tests in cardiac arrest units, where they've put a hidden target very high up in the vicinity, in such a way that you would only see it if you were above, near the ceiling. And I kind of say the hope is not really the right word, but the idea is that if anyone has another heart attack and a near-death experience, and their mind leaves their body, could they actually go up and describe what that hidden target is? Now, I have positively reviewed grant applications for that kind of research, because I think that would be an amazing challenge to skeptics like me if somebody could produce that evidence. So far, nobody has.
Now, there's some interesting anecdotes about that I've read.
Oh, there's a lot of interesting anecdotes.
Like people being able to recall various things that happened in the operating room while they were...
Yeah, but most of that can be explained in terms of people... a number of different factors again, but, one of the most important ones is people regaining consciousness, which we know that sometimes that happens, which is a terrifying thought. But while you're actually on the operating table, you can sometimes regain consciousness. Now, even if we know the first sense that comes back is hearing, so even if you can't see what's going on, you can hear what's going on. And the idea is that what would happen in that situation is that you'd have a mental model of what's happening around you,
And you can hear everything. You could hear sticky notes and tools and drills.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is that people report kind of looking down on it from above.
Yeah. Well, my first thought was if you place the target too high and the spirit doesn't leave the body to that height, then, you're going to have to put a lot of targets down.
Well, maybe, yeah. I mean, there's Sam Parnia is one of the people who was kind of involved in this research. I remember doing a kind of TV interview with him, and this was back in the early days when they were just starting doing this. When his group were just starting doing this kind of research, and him saying that if after 5 years nobody's reported, well, we'll know that near-death experience. And I'm thinking, no, not at all. If I were having a near-death experience, the last thing on my mind might be, oh, I'd better go and look at that target, and then I can report back. I'd be thinking, what the is going on? So no, I kind of disagreed with Sam on that one. But but I thought it was a nice approach because it could potentially throw a real challenge to the skeptics. It hasn't happened. Maybe it will, but those kind of studies have been going on for a few years now, and so we've got the anecdotal accounts of people floating out the window and seeing tennis shoes on window ledges and all this kind of stuff, but. Yeah,
I actually emailed Sam. No response.
No, I'll see if I can get him to come up.
Ooh, yeah, excellent. So my question was going to be about psychedelic, I guess, drugs. There's no other way to put it.
Drugs.
What's your take on the sort of the expansion of conscious awareness or experience? Like you talked about the pineal gland as being the place of the mind-body problem, and the pineal gland seems to be affected by certain substances.
Well, the first thing to say is that I claim no expertise in that kind of area whatsoever. I mean, the most, I've tried a bit of weed occasionally, and this is my drug of choice. I've thought this even from being a kind of, even when I was still at school, I always used to think that anything that kind of affected your brain in such a way that it wasn't working properly anymore is not likely to give you a bigger insight into the nature of reality. But of course, I know lots of people don't see it that way, and I've got close friends, many of whom do research. Not many of whom. I've got one friend in particular who is a real expert.
He's a really good friend, so it feels like
kind
many.
Of area. Yeah, well, exactly, because he's larger than life, and maybe they're right. I kind of read, Doors of Perception, and so I'm aware of the kind of arguments, but I've always basically thought that I don't buy it. But I mean, I could be wrong. It's a really important thing to say.
Well, it's interesting that everybody right now on Earth thinks that drugs have to have some sort of transcendent application, but sometimes people just want to drink wine because it relaxes them.
I do.
It's weird how it has to be instrumentalized, or everything's got to be a medicine on Earth right now.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of quite easygoing regarding kind of what should and should not be legalized. I think I'm fairly easygoing anyway, and I don't have kind of I'm certainly not kind of I'm not part of the just say no brigade. I really am not. I mean, I have very limited personal experience on that side of the question. So
fair enough.
Yeah, it would be interesting because I know that for something like psychedelic mushrooms, which there's places that are starting to legalize these because they're significantly showing therapeutic benefits for changing mindsets and everything else.
PTSD, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Depression.
Yeah. No, I've seen some of those reports in the general news, but I'm not familiar with the area.
Sure.
In terms of the literature.
Well, we'll have to follow that up somewhere else.
So we only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask you a question that I ask all the humans we talk to at the very end. And that is, in your human perspective, not necessarily your professional opinion, but what do you think is the biggest threat to your species in the next few minutes, or the next century, or really just in the immediate future?
I love the timescale options that he always offers.
Right, I think climate change has got to be the big one. I mean, but we're going to come through one way or another. The COVID pandemic, which is obviously the big thing that's occupying everybody's minds at the moment. But in the kind of midterm, at least, it's going to be climate change.
And you're worried about climate threatening people with starvation or displacing populations, or
everything, the whole package. I mean, if we don't take radical action soon, it's going to have all of those kind of effects, and it's not going to be good news for the planet. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, I would have answered that differently. I'd have said the nuclear threat, and that's not gone away. And we've had an announcement today that the British government is going to increase our number of nuclear warheads. Whoopee. Yeah, so there are kind of there are lots of threats. We have lots of ways of destroying ourselves on this planet. I honestly think you guys should probably just stay away.
Yeah, we got to refuel some drones, so we're not getting out of this trip.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. French.
Yeah, it's been really fun to talk to you. Thanks for all your ideas.
Okay, you guys take care.
You as well.
Okay.
Bye.